And then I'll make sure I pause it so we don't get that feedback or doubling down, I guess.
Did you see there's like this filtering touch up my appearance feature that makes you, it softens the focus. It like, oh, my pores disappeared. I bet I know a lot of people who definitely will
We're
use
using it. I heard there's a whole, wow, it's a little longer to load. But there's a whole bunch of people that are magazines and stuff. Here we go. Are telling you how to do your makeup for online for the best.
Oh yeah, I've been reading those articles. Can't you tell? Like,
Yeah. All right. Oh, great. So if you're joining us here on Zoom, please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A box, and I'll raise my hand and get Bobby's attention to ask your question. And we are also this is being on or sent over to YouTube live as well. So we'll have a nice little astronomy lesson here with Bobby Farlice-Rubio. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Leela. And unfortunately, the rain outside is probably going to preclude you from seeing what I want to talk about tonight. But I think you'll have plenty of chances to see what constellations we're going to feature today. Last time we were talking about the Pleiades and Venus. That show continues. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but make sure you watch our previous show if you want to know about what's going on in the Western sky. But actually, I want to talk about what's going to be in the Eastern sky. So I'm going to load up my trusty stellarium here, which those of you who have not used it before, go to stellarium.org and you can download this free software and have a virtual planetarium on your desktop computer, whether it's Windows or Mac or even Linux. There's a version for everybody. So when you use this program, you can advance time and see what things are going to be like in the evening. So why don't I give us a nice little springtime sunset by hitting the L button until the clock starts running faster, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, and hit that a couple more times and we can speed up time and see tonight's sunset, which if it were clear, we would see it happening around 7:25 tonight. But I guarantee you won't see that as well as you can in Stellarium right now. So just at that moment when the sun begins to set, it won't take much longer for you to see planet Venus, which was the feature of our last planetarium lesson. So I just want to remind you that she's still out there. But I want to talk about something that's going to be visible in the east at the time when the sun is setting and the sky is getting darker. So I'm going to, oh, what's that over there? That is the moon. Okay, I have to tell you folks, Stellarium is extremely accurate and to scale. Oh, that's not the moon, that's Arcturus. What a fool I am. Wow, that is a very bright star. And I think Stellarium is making it look a little brighter than it might seem in the sky. We'll talk about Arcturus on another show, but that is one of the brightest top 5 bright stars in the sky. But if you're looking for that full moon is no longer a full moon. It is now a waning gibbous, and it will be rising much later than it was earlier in this week. But Arcturus is not one of the stars I wanted to focus on. This bright blue one down here called Spica is the one I wanted to focus on. We might use Arcturus as a guide to help us get there. But I'm waiting for the sky to get fully dark. And this is what it'll look like at about 9 o'clock p.m. By then, it should be pretty dark. And I want to show you a constellation that not only is she a goddess that was worshipped on 3 different continents, but she's also a major character in a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical written by a Vermont singer-songwriter named Anais Mitchell. So you might be thinking, all this sounds crazy, but I'm talking about the constellation that most people know as Virgo. Now, Virgo means the Virgin in Latin, and Virgo is not an easy constellation to see, but when you hear that name, the Virgin, it doesn't really tell you who Virgo is, okay? But if you were an ancient Egyptian during the time of the building of the pyramids, you would have thought of this part of the sky as being the goddess Isis. And of course, that word Isis has now been ruined by a group of terrorists, but I'm talking about the ancient Egyptian goddess of fertility. She's the one who taught humans how to grow wheat in their fields, and she's associated with agriculture. And for the ancient Egyptians, she lived in this part of the sky. And Spica is her brightest star. I'll show you what she looks like in a moment. But if you were to leave Egypt in those ancient times and go up into Mesopotamia in Asia, in the region of where Iraq is now, in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and you talk to the ancient Sumerians or the Babylonians or the Assyrians, and they would have told you of a goddess named Ishtar. And Ishtar is a goddess of a different sort of fertility that the ancient Sumerians and Mesopotamians worshipped, and they associated this part of the sky with her. So we've got the goddess Isis in Egypt, in Africa. We've got Ishtar in the Middle East, in Asia. And if you were to go into Europe, maybe a couple thousand years later, the ancient Greeks, they wouldn't have told you her name was Virgo. They would have told you her name is Persephone. And she is the goddess of flowers. And now you may be seeing the connection between Persephone and that Tony Award winning musical Hades Town, because she's a major character in that. So I think I saw a question flash up. So let me see if there is any to answer while we're there. Leela, do we have a question?
No, I was just asking people that they could feel free to type their question in here.
Okay,
so
good.
it's just letting them know.
All right. Well, I'll continue because I'll be honest, when you look for Virgo, you may have a hard time seeing the picture of the lady. You might see Spica very easily. Actually, there's an old trick to using Spica, to finding Spica by using Arcturus, that very bright yellowish star that I mistakenly thought was the little tiny moon that appears in stellarium sky. So forgive me for that mistake earlier. However, if you look up here and you see the Big Dipper, which will be the subject of other planetarium shows in the future, that Big Dipper has an arc-shaped handle, and that arc, that curve, arcs to Arcturus, which is one of the cheesy little mnemonic devices that astronomers use all the time. And if you can arc to Arcturus, then you can spike to Spica. It's a straight line as if you were spiking a volleyball, and then you find the star Spica. But if you are looking, in the southeast, Spica will be bright enough that you will see it easily, but you may not notice all the other stars around Spica that actually belong to the constellation of Virgo that make our picture of Persephone. So let me take that highlight off of Spica. And I want to imagine that Spica is not actually a part of this lady's body. It is actually a flower that sits by her side. And for me to draw her for you, I'm going to start with her torso, because that's going to be the easiest part for you to find. If you look above Spica, you'll see this star and connected to this star and these two stars, and you might see this little trapezoid shape right here. This is the middle of her body, her torso. This is her waist, and this is her two shoulders. Once you've seen this little torso shape, you might not have a hard time finding the rest. Once you can see the shoulders, I want you to imagine that this is her left arm sticking straight up in the air. Here's her left hand, her left elbow, and her left shoulder. And here's her right shoulder, her right elbow, and her right hand. So these three stars make her right arm, and these three stars make her left arm, and these are her shoulders. So here's the torso, here are the two arms. I hope this is being easy to see, because if the hardest part to see in Virgo is actually her face. These are her two eyes, her little button nose, and her pointy chin. Why the long face, my lady? I always jokingly say. You can see that long triangle. It looks like a face. It looks like a concerned face. I always joke that it looks like the Munch's Scream painting from Norway. She does not look happy. And you can imagine that her hair up here is up in the air. She's in distress of some kind. Well, if this is the triangular face of this lady, Persephone, Ishtar, Isis, here are her arms, here's her other arm, here is her torso, and now to find her legs, which actually stretch out beyond and below where Spica is. So if this is her waist, you can imagine this is one of her legs, this is one of her feet right there, and here's her other foot, or 2 feet are close together, 2 pairs of relatively bright stars, but not very bright. So draw a straight line back with one of her feet, and you can see it leads you to her hip. And the same thing happens when you draw another straight line with the other foot. So you can kind of imagine these as legs that are dangling. This is her torso. Her arms are splayed out, and her head is here. And the brightest part of her by far is Spica, that bright blue star, which, according to many mythologies, represents a flower. Just so you know, that word Spica is actually the word that spike comes from. And I don't mean spike like sitting on a thumbtack. I mean spike like the flowers on a wheat plant. So you might see how some flowers are arranged in a spike, on a vertical stalk, and that word spike actually comes from that. So the word spica refers to a flower, a spike flower that she's holding or has fallen from her hand. Now, just so you know, when you put up the artwork that Stellarium includes, that picture that they have does not necessarily match the picture that I just described to you. Notice that they have her holding a spike flower, like wheat bundle here, where Spica is. But if you look carefully at this illustration, you'll see that it doesn't really match the stars in any significant way. It's almost like they were just, trying to put a lady up there that looks vaguely like Taylor Swift, in my opinion. But if you put up the connected dot lines on Stellarium, these lines are not all that helpful either, because it makes it look like she has a terribly broken leg. What happened? A compound fracture, and they make it look like Spica is her rear end. But that's not even what Spica's supposed to be. Notice that I drew this as her hip on her side, and that makes her leg straight and not so broken. And just so you know, when you look at constellation books, the illustrations don't always match what you see in the sky. And sometimes those connect the dot lines are not very useful. So I recommend that you use your own imagination and make your own picture however you'd like. But my favorite book for constellation illustrations was the one prepared by the illustrator of Curious George, H.A. Ray, who did a great job of drawing the constellations with the actual stars. And that I don't agree with his vision on every single constellation, but I think his matched mostly what I see too. And just so you know, this constellation pictures is a very subjective thing. The stars that belong to the constellation are fixed, but the way you see the picture is totally up to the observer, totally up to the person who's looking. So don't just go by what I say. Get creative, make up your own pictures with the constellations. Maybe you don't think it looks like the way I did, but I do want you to know, historically speaking, this part of the sky is associated with goddesses that are all connected to agriculture and the growing of food and the blooming of flowers. So let me put the little story. Oh, is that the moon? Yeah, that's the moon. So please don't think I was crazy for thinking that Arcturus was the moon, because you can see that in Stellarium, the moon is not very big, but the moon is rising very late compared to the last few nights. In fact, just to complete the thought, we're in a waning gibbous moon phase right now, which is something you can do with Stellarium very easily. You zoom in and see the picture. But it's kind of appropriate. The moon that we just had, we had a discussion with some of my other students about the fact that the moon that just happened to pass is known as the pink moon. Pink moon, not because it's the color pink. Pink moon because it coincides with the blooming, mostly in Europe, of a particular flower called grass pink or Deptford pink. So you may see that plant blooming in Vermont, but it won't bloom till later because our seasons are, well, more harsh than they are in the parts of Europe where the pink moon was named. But that pink moon, think of the flower blooming, is a perfect thing to think about when we see Lady Persephone, the goddess of flowers. Now, some of you may already know the Greek mythological story. There are her eyes, there are her shoulders, there's her waist, and there are her legs. In case you lost the picture, here's her arm and the other arm. So I just want to give you a quick reminder of the story if you've forgotten it, but Persephone in the Greek mythology is the goddess of flowers, the daughter of Demeter. And Demeter is like Mother Nature herself, the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of all green growing things. I should mention that Demeter's Roman name is Ceres, which is where the word cereal comes from. And if you've ever been to Montpelier, the state capital of Vermont, standing on the golden dome of our state house, a recently renovated statue of Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, sits. So Ceres is Demeter, is the mother of Persephone. So Vermont State House has Persephone's mom on the roof, to put it, in a short way. So think about that. The goddess of agriculture, the goddess of flowers, Persephone is her daughter. That kind of makes sense. And there is a day when Persephone was out in a meadow picking flowers, enjoying the sunshine and the beautiful blue sky. And at that time, she got kidnapped by the wicked god of the underworld, Hades. Hades, the god of the dead, the one that the Romans called Pluto, he wanted to marry Persephone, but he knew that the goddess of flowers would never willingly go into the underworld to live with him in the land of the dead, when she would rather be out in the sun, in the grass, in the meadows, making the flowers bloom. So Hades decided to kidnap her. And while she was trapped in the underworld, he didn't give her anything to eat. He didn't give her the instructions on how to behave down there. She never really died. She was an immortal goddess, but she was trapped in the land of the dead. And without knowing what to do, she accidentally ate the food of the dead. She picked a pomegranate from a cursed tree. And when she took a bite of that pomegranate, she, by eating the food of the dead, condemned herself to stay in the land of the dead forever. Which means that kind of was what Hades was hoping for. He wanted to trick her and to get her to live with him forever. But when Demeter found out that her daughter was trapped in the land of the dead, she sent a message, but with Hermes, of course. Hermes zoomed right into the underworld, as he frequently did, and he went to Hades and said, if you don't let Persephone go, there's not going to be any flowers blooming out there. You see, Demeter needs Persephone to make the flowers bloom, and if you keep her in the underworld forever, no flowers will bloom, and if no flowers will bloom, there will be no nectar for the butterflies and the honeybees, and if there's no nectar for the honeybees and the butterflies and no flowers, there will also be no fruit, no seeds, no wheat, no pomegranates, no apples, nothing. And Hades realized that he had made a great mistake. If by keeping the goddess of flowers underground forever, there would be nothing but death in the world above. And Hades couldn't accept all of the world's people at the same time. If the entire world starved to death and came down to Hades town, to the underworld, it would destroy the necropolis. He would have chaos in the streets, and he would no longer be able to keep order over the realm of the dead. So he realized, I have to make a compromise with Mother Nature. He made a deal, a bargain. He said, fine, since your daughter Persephone ate some of the food of the dead, she will remain in the underworld, but I will let her leave for half of the year. For one half of the year, she can run alongside you in your happy little sunny green land. The other half of the year, she must return to me. As you can imagine, Hades might have sounded like. Well, that's the deal that they struck. And think about this. Persephone just appeared in our sky, Virgo, the constellation. A month ago, you would have had to stay up pretty late to see her. 2 months ago, you would not have seen her at all unless you stayed up till the early morning hours. And now that she's appeared in the sky in the evenings at a reasonable time, guess what's happening outside? Those little flowers like the pink are blooming. And soon our coltsfoot is going to be blooming, and our pussy willow trees are blooming. And outside, the flowers are awakening just as the goddess of flowers appears in our evening sky. We have some time to see Virgo in the sky, but if you've been listening to the story, you can probably already guess as to what time of year we will lose the ability to see this constellation. Starting in September, she becomes invisible. Slowly, the sun will cover up the part of the sky where she is. In fact, I'm going to put up the line that we know as the zodiac line, the ecliptic. See how that line runs right through where Virgo is? She seems to be resting on it. Her feet are here, her head is here, and Spica is just below that line. And the sun will occupy this part of our sky starting in September through October into November, which means you literally will not see her in the sky because she'll be out during the daytime. And that's when she disappears from the earth. And guess what happens starting in September, October, November? All the flowers stop blooming and the world becomes dark and cold. You could say that according to the logic of the Greek mythology, Mother Nature has lost the spirit that she needs to keep the season going, and the world goes into winter once Persephone goes to Hades town. So ancient myths connected to actual things happening in the sky. So I don't want you to worry about poor Persephone. We don't have to go start a GoFundMe page to go rescue her from Hades Town. But I hope you see how that ancient story of the goddess that's trapped in the land of the dead for half the year and with us for the other half of the year is not just some funny story from Greek mythology, but it's actually a really nice illustration of the way that that constellation associated with Persephone, Virgo, moves through the sky. We see her in the spring all summer long, and when fall comes, we say goodbye to the beautiful goddess of flowers, and we say goodbye to the beautiful blooming flowers outside. So I love the constellation Virgo because of how it connects to this story, but Virgo as a constellation is not the easiest one to see. So be patient with yourself, use Stellarium to practice, and when it gets dark at night, go out there and try to see her using Spica as your guide. If the full moon is out, which will be in another month from now, that makes it almost impossible to see most of her. You'll see Spica, but if you watch the pink moon that happened earlier in this week, it actually was right where she is. Maybe I'll leave with that. I'll show you where the full moon was, because in Stellarium, if you want to go back in time, all you got to do is hit the minus button. And if I just want to make sure you see that it's April 9th in here, but if I go to April 8th, I just put the minus button. You can see the moon was closer to Persephone. It was right below her knee. And here, during the night of the full pink moon, notice that the moon was right like on her waist. It was like where her belly button would be.
So Bobby,
And,
can you share your screen quickly just to show us?
oh, I am so sorry. I made the mistake of not sharing the screen. I'm so bad. So let me repeat what I just said, and you can see it. So in Stellarium, like I just showed you, I'm going to go, this is where tonight's moon is going to be. Notice that it won't be rising until almost 9 o'clock. But yesterday, the moon was there. And you can do that in Stellarium just by hitting plus or minus. Minus goes back a day, plus goes forward a day. And if I go back 2 days to Monday night, you can see the moon was right where her belly button would be. So there are her eyes, there are her arms, there's her torso, and here are her legs. And Spica would easily be visible, but honestly, on a full moon night, the glare from the full moon might make it hard to see all of Virgo. But I always tell folks, it's good to learn the stars in a constellation too, learn the bright stars, because sometimes whether it's cloudy or whether it's the full moon, you may not see an entire constellation, but if you can at least identify one of the stars in it, then you know you're looking at that constellation. And Spica is by far the brightest star in Virgo. It's in the top 5 of all the stars in the sky for brightness. And the only thing close to as bright as Spica would be Arcturus in that same direction. And I wasn't going to get into the whole constellation of Boötes, which most people want to pronounce as Bootes. But that constellation really looks like an ice cream cone. So that's another freebie that you can add. Arcturus is the bottom of the cone. Here is the waffle cone. And here is the big scoop of chocolate starry ice cream right there. So an ice cream cone as a freebie next to the famous ancient goddess from many different cultures. So just think how cool that is. You can look at this constellation and connect yourself to people who lived in ancient Egypt, people who lived in the ancient Middle East and ancient Europe, the Greeks, particularly, and the Romans. But that's not how she'll look tonight. That's how she'll look tonight, with the moon much farther below her as the moon is continuing its constant orbit around the earth. So that's a challenging constellation. Maybe next time I'll give you one that's close to Virgo that might be a lot easier for you to see, but also as ancient as her. But I hope you folks enjoyed that constellation tour. I hope you enjoyed our virtual planetarium show. I'll stop the share this time. And now that we can see each other again, or you can see me, let me know if there's any questions on our chat. Please send them up our way before we say goodbye.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any, but as we finish up, I would just want to say thank you so much, Bobby, for all that wonderful information. Especially, I think tonight would be a great night to study with Stellarium rather than the night sky with our current weather. But it's a great free online tool, and I think it's a wonderful way to practice and get used to the night sky. And so thank you, and look forward to next week when we learn a whole new constellation and what to be looking for. Oh, you know what? We do have someone, hold on. little Q&A. Oh, someone just said thank you.
And I'm just replying, you're welcome. And thank you folks for watching. And I can't wait till the day when we can have folks back in our real planetarium here at the Fairbanks Museum. But until then, you do have the real sky at your disposal. And that's the real deal. So look at it that way. Stellarium is your practice. The real sky is there once the rain clears away. And I hope you bundle up and get out there and look for the goddess of flowers in the stars. But thank you all. And thank you, Leela. It's nice to see you and hear your voice. And hopefully all of us will be together under the stars one night soon.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And feel free to join us tomorrow morning. We've got Household Science for preschool starting at 9:05 tomorrow morning. All right. Take care.
Be well, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.